I hope you choke on every bite. My mother-in-law said it loud enough for the next table to hear. She leaned closer, a thin, cold smile on her lips, the kind of smile that only appears when she's certain she's in control. It was my sister-in-law's engagement party, a private room in a restaurant in Burlington, 60 guests, warm golden lights, glasses clinking, laughter everywhere. And I had just been assigned to prepare and serve the cake in front of everyone. No one asked if I agreed. She had called 3 weeks earlier, not to ask, but to inform, like she was assigning a shift at a fair booth. A decent cake, she said, not something homemade. Homemade. In 4 years of being part of this family, I had grown used to the way she used that word to box me in. I dropped out of college after 18 months. I run a small home bakery. No degree, nothing formal. To her, I was a hobby that never grew up. She had a culinary degree from George Brown. She mentioned it the way people mention their daily vitamins. And me? I had spent 4 years in a kitchen, trained by a French pastry chef, learning the exact temperature of chocolate, the precision of a flawless glaze. But she never asked, and I never told. I slowly let go of Daniel's hand under the table. Then I stood up. If she wanted to put me on a stage, then I would step onto it. 3 weeks before the party, my mother-in-law called me, not to ask, not to discuss. "I've signed you up to bring the engagement cake," she said, casual, like she had just done me a favor. "Sophie wants strawberries and cream. Make it presentable, not something homemade." I stayed silent for a few seconds, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what she meant. This wasn't a request. It was a test, a trap, carefully set. If I refused, I'd be the uncooperative daughter-in-law. If I did it poorly, she'd have another reason to remind everyone I had no degree. If I did it perfectly, she could still say it was just luck. "I'll do it," I replied, calm. Over the next 2.5 weeks, I tested, not because I needed to prove anything to her, but because Sophie deserved a real cake for her day. I chose a 3-tier entremet, white chocolate and raspberry mousse, a mirror glaze smooth as glass, fresh raspberries placed in perfect circles, and hand-pulled sugar on top, curved like a frozen wave. I tested the glaze 4 times, until the surface reflected light without a single ripple. That morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. The kitchen was silent, only the sound of the mixer, and my breathing steady. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew something else. Tonight, when that box opens, there will be no space left for half-hearted dismissal. My mother-in-law's disrespect didn't happen in a single day. It was built through judging looks, through comments that sounded harmless but repeated enough times to leave marks. The first time we met, I told her I ran a small home bakery. She gave a thin smile. "That's cute," then turned to Daniel, asking about his job, his promotions, his future. In that moment, I understood exactly where I stood in her eyes, a temporary choice, not a woman with a career worth respecting. After my son, Theo, was born, things became tighter, more controlled. She corrected how I cooked for him, how I decorated his birthday cake. She even said in front of guests, "Anyone can learn baking on YouTube, but real baking requires a degree and discipline." The irony? She said that while eating a slice of olive oil lemon cake, a cake she had just praised, before knowing I made it. I chose silence for a long time, not because I was weak, but because I understood something clearly. Arguing with prejudice only drains you. Every time Daniel defended me, she would turn on him, criticize him, leave him carrying guilt for days. I didn't want my small family to become a battlefield, so I stepped back, focused on my work, on orders, on each layer of cream, on every cake that came out perfect. But beneath that silence, there was something solid. I knew who I was. I had spent 4 years training seriously under a pastry chef trained in France. I understood the chemistry inside the oven, the exact shine of a perfect glaze, the smallest details that turn dessert into art. My value was never in a diploma on a wall, but in skill refined every single day. And if you've ever been underestimated because your path doesn't look like everyone else's, type 1 in the comments. Not to prove anything to others, but to remind yourself, real skill and quiet persistence always find their voice, sooner or later.
The truth is, I never tried to prove myself to my mother-in-law with words. I did try, a few times in the early years, when things still felt like they could be fixed through calm conversations. I told her about my time working in a small bakery in Hamilton, about the long night shifts, about the French pastry chef who patiently taught me every basic technique. But every time she would just nod, briefly, her eyes drifting elsewhere. Then she would change the subject back to degrees, certifications, and the professional standards she believed were the only measure of value. Slowly, I realized something. She wasn't really listening. She was just waiting for her turn to speak. And when someone has already decided who you are, any information that contradicts it becomes invisible. So I stopped explaining. Not because I gave up, but because I understood. Real competence doesn't need arguments. It needs the right moment to be seen. For years, I lived in 2 worlds. One world, my kitchen at home, where I took orders for wedding cakes, birthday cakes, celebration cakes. Mornings started at 5 a.m., the sound of the mixer echoing while the neighborhood was still asleep. Nights ended when the final glaze set perfectly under warm light. Customers came back. They referred friends. They sent long, heartfelt messages. I built my reputation through quality, through precision, through pride in every piece. The other world was family dinners, where I became a smaller version of myself, where my work was called just baking for fun, making a little extra money, something to do at home. Each comment not loud enough to start a fight, but sharp enough to leave a mark. So I learned to smile, to change the subject, or stay quiet, not because I agreed, but because I chose to save my energy for what truly mattered, my son, my marriage, and the passion I had spent thousands of hours refining. The biggest insight I gained from all of this was simple. Disrespect rarely comes from truth. It comes from fear. My mother-in-law built her identity around degrees, formal paths, clear structures. That was her world. So my existence, someone without formal credentials, yet still highly skilled, quietly challenged everything she believed in, and that made her uncomfortable, even defensive. And her defense looked like this. She minimized me. Understanding this didn't make her words hurt less, but it freed me from something heavy, the need to prove myself. I didn't need to convince her to believe in me. I only needed to keep doing my work well. So when she assigned me the engagement cake, I said yes, not to please her, but because Marcus and Sophie deserved something real. In the 2.5 weeks of preparation, I tested, again and again, every mousse layer precisely balanced, every cake layer perfectly leveled, every glaze temperature controlled to the exact degree for a flawless shine. It wasn't just a cake. It was 4 years of serious training, hundreds of failures and restarts, and a quiet, unshakable belief in the path I chose. And through all of it, I felt calm. No need to prove, no need to be recognized. Just focus, confidence, and a quiet pride that didn't need an audience. If you're also working silently in a field others don't understand or don't value, type 1 in the comments. Not for sympathy, but to remind yourself, you are on the right path, whether anyone sees it yet or not. Yellow. The engagement party took place in a warm, private dining room. Soft golden lights, laughter filling the space. Sophie wiped away tears during her toast. Marcus cracked jokes that made everyone laugh. Everything was going smoothly, so smoothly that I almost forgot I was waiting for something uncomfortable. Then my mother-in-law stood up. "Before we bring out the cake," she said, her voice clear, intentional, "I'd like to say a few words about the effort behind it." The room turned toward her. She looked at me, a polite smile, sharp underneath. "Claire volunteered to make this cake at home, a personal touch, though it may not reach the standards of a professionally trained baker. But it's the thought that counts, isn't it?" A few polite laughs filled the room. Under the table, Daniel's hand tightened around mine. Sophie lowered her gaze, cheeks flushed. Marcus looked uncomfortable. And me? I took a slow breath. Her words didn't surprise me anymore. They only confirmed what I already knew. She was still seeing me through the same old lens. As the staff prepared to bring out the cake, she leaned closer, whispering something sharp enough for the next table to hear. I let go of Daniel's hand, stood up, and walked toward the kitchen. Calm. No rush. No defense. The cake box was placed carefully on the dessert table. I opened it, slowly, and the room changed. The glaze, perfectly smooth, reflected the light like a mirror. Fresh raspberries lined each tier in perfect circles. The hand-pulled sugar on top sparkled like a piece of art. The room fell silent for a few seconds. Then, gasps. "Oh my God, it's beautiful," Sophie said, her voice shaking. A relative stepped closer. "Who made this?" Marcus looked straight at his mother and said clearly, "Claire did." I sliced clean pieces, each layer sharp, smooth, precise. I watched as they tasted, surprised eyes, satisfied smiles, small, convincing nods. No explanation needed, no argument required. The cake spoke for itself. My mother-in-law didn't take a second piece. As the party wound down, Aunt Patricia approached me, her eyes genuine. "Where did you learn to bake like this?" I smiled and quietly told her about my training. I didn't look at my mother-in-law, but I knew she was close enough to hear every word. For the first time, the truth was no longer silent. That night, on the drive home, the air in the car was quiet, but not heavy, comfortable. Streetlights stretched into long golden lines across the windshield. Theo was asleep in the back seat, still holding a small box with his slice of cake. Daniel drove with one hand. The other rested gently on mine. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "I am," I said. And this time, it wasn't to reassure him. It was the truth. He stayed quiet for a moment. Then, "Mom crossed a line," he said. I should have said something right then. I squeezed his hand. "You were there," I said. That was enough. He glanced at me, a small smile forming. "You knew exactly what you were doing when you chose that cake, didn't you?" I thought about that morning. 5 a.m. A silent kitchen. The final glaze pouring down, setting perfectly under the light. I thought about Sophie's tears, Daniel's pride, and my mother-in-law's rare silence. I just made a cake, worthy of the moment, I said quietly. 2 days later, my mother-in-law called. No direct apology, no clear admission, just a different tone. "The cake was quite impressive," she said, hesitant. To anyone else, it might have sounded like a casual compliment, but from her, it was a step back from judgment. "Thank you," I replied calmly. "Where did you learn that technique?" "The glaze." "From Suzanne Coté. She trained at the Paul Bocuse Institute in Lyon." Silence, on the other end. "I didn't know you had formal training," she said slowly. "Because you never asked," I replied, gently. This silence lasted longer. Not tense, just realization.
The conversation ended there. No drama, no confrontation. But something had shifted. 6 weeks later, at Theo's school performance, that shift became clearer. She showed up, holding a small bouquet. She sat behind us, watched every song, even when Theo missed a few beats. When it ended, in the noisy gym, filled with juice boxes and snack trays, she walked toward me. "I owe you an apology," she said. This time, her eyes didn't look away. What I said at the party was wrong and unfair. I looked at her and knew this wasn't just politeness. It was real, even if still imperfect. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. She took a deep breath. "I judged you based on degrees," she said. "I never asked what you actually knew, what you had done. That was my mistake." I smiled slightly. "In 4 years, you never asked me a single question about my work." She nodded. Slowly. "That's true. And I'm trying to change that." The moment was quiet. No drama. No applause. But it marked something important. From judgment to acknowledgement. From distance to a chance at understanding.
After that apology, nothing changed overnight. There were no tearful hugs, no dramatic promises. The change came slowly, carefully, but it was real, and it showed most clearly the following Saturday. "Can I stop by your baking session?" my mother-in-law asked on the phone, her voice slightly hesitant, just to watch. "Of course," I said. No sarcasm, no test, just an open door. That afternoon, she arrived 10 minutes early, neatly dressed, hair tied back, her eyes scanning my kitchen with a curiosity I had never seen before. On the table, everything carefully measured: white chocolate, gelatin, cream, fresh raspberries, and a digital thermometer placed precisely beside them. "You prepare everything very professionally," she said. For the first time, no hidden meaning. I smiled. Beautiful baking starts with precision. At first, she just watched. She asked questions about glaze temperature, about timing, about how to get a perfectly smooth surface, not testing, learning. When I invited her to try pouring the glaze herself, she hesitated, just for a moment, then nodded. Her hands were steadier than I expected. She focused, pouring a smooth, even stream, her eyes following the glossy liquid as it covered the cake. When it was done, she stepped back, looked at it, then exhaled. "It's beautiful," she said softly, surprised and quietly proud. After that day, she came more often, not always talking, sometimes just standing beside me, watching, helping measure ingredients, wiping the counter, practicing piping with intense focus. Saturday afternoons became a rhythm. Theo loved those days, sitting on a high chair, handing her the wrong ingredients on purpose, laughing when she pretended to be confused. His laughter softened what used to be rigid distance. I watched them, a woman who once judged me, and a child who knew no judgment, learning to connect through flour, sugar, and laughter. One day, after we finished a nearly perfect mirror glaze cake, she looked at me. "I underestimated you," she said. "Not just your skill, but your patience. And the way you kept this family together. That's not easy." I didn't need a longer apology. I simply nodded. "We're both learning," I said. In that moment, I realized my perspective had changed too. I no longer saw her as someone trying to diminish me, but as a woman who had spent her whole life believing in a rigid system and was now learning to step outside it. Her change didn't erase the past, but it created a present that felt lighter,
and a future that felt possible. I understood something clearly. Real respect doesn't come from winning. It comes from small actions, repeated consistently. A genuine question, a shared afternoon, a look without judgment. And sometimes, awakening doesn't come through big words. It comes in quiet moments, when two people stand in the same kitchen, looking at a finished cake, and realize that they're finally seeing each other differently.
After those afternoons we spent baking together, the relationship between my mother-in-law and me was no longer driven by defensiveness or assumptions. But more importantly, I realized something else. The change didn't just come from her. It came from me, from how I chose to respond. Before, I stayed silent to avoid conflict. Now, I was still calm, but I no longer made myself smaller. I spoke about my work, about large orders, about new techniques I was experimenting with. And for the first time, she truly listened. One Saturday afternoon, as we finished a multi-layer mousse cake, she asked, "When did you start teaching others?" "About 2 years ago," I replied. "It started with friends, then word spread. Now I host small classes every month." She nodded, thoughtful. "You've built more than I realized. Not just skills, but a community." It was a simple sentence, but it carried weight. For the first time, she saw my work as a real career, not a hobby, not something temporary. In that moment, I understood the power of calm boundaries. I didn't need to revisit old wounds, but I also refused to return to silence. When she occasionally slipped back into comparison or judgment, I gently corrected. "Every path has its own standards, Mom." No tension, no sharp edges, just clarity. And that was enough. The biggest change wasn't in what she said, it was in what she did. She started introducing me as my daughter-in-law, a professional baker, not she bakes at home. She brought our cakes to gatherings, talked proudly about mirror glaze, about flavor balance, about technique. The same things she once dismissed became something she celebrated. And I changed too. I stopped seeing her as someone who wanted to diminish me. I began seeing her as someone who simply didn't understand until she was invited to see. That was the shift. When you invite someone into your world, instead of pushing them out, you give them a chance to change. What I learned most was this: lasting respect doesn't come from proving yourself right. It comes from consistency, from living your values every day. I didn't need to win an argument. I just needed to keep showing up, with clarity, with calm, with integrity. And when respect is built through experience, through listening, through boundaries, it stops being fragile. It becomes a new foundation for a relationship where both people are finally seen for who they truly are. After all the gradual changes, the relationship between my mother-in-law and me didn't become perfect, but it became real and easier to breathe in. The biggest difference wasn't in grand words or dramatic apologies. It was in the small things, repeated over time. Every Saturday, she showed up, sometimes with ingredients, sometimes with nothing but curiosity and the desire to learn. The kitchen no longer felt tense. Instead, there was focus, soft conversations, and sometimes Theo's laughter filling the room. At family gatherings, the way she spoke about me changed too. No more vague comments, no more quiet dismissal. Now, she would say, with a quiet kind of pride, "Claire made the engagement cake. She has an incredible mirror glaze technique." Nothing exaggerated, nothing showy, but enough to feel seen. Of course, there were still awkward moments. Old habits don't disappear overnight. Sometimes she would ask questions with a hint of comparison. Sometimes she would mention degrees out of habit. But now, she noticed, and she corrected herself, not because she was forced to,
but because she understood. And that understanding came from experience, not from arguments, not from explanations, but from standing in the same kitchen, from watching, from doing. I realized something important. The past cannot be erased, but the future can be rebuilt, not through one big moment, but through consistency, through effort, through choosing to understand instead of judge. Respect doesn't arrive all at once. It grows in small actions, in honest words, in the quiet decision to listen. And for me, that was enough. Not a perfect ending, but a meaningful one. A journey that began with hurt and ended with something real.
After that, my life returned to my familiar rhythm, but it felt completely different. The small kitchen still lit up every early morning. Batches of cakes still came out of the oven one after another. Theo's laughter still echoed as he accidentally mixed the wrong ingredients. But now, on quiet Saturday afternoons, seeing my mother-in-law standing beside the counter, watching carefully as the glaze flowed smoothly over the cake, had become something natural, something normal. And that's when I understood something deeper. The greatest victory is not making someone admit you're good enough. It's keeping your calm, your self-respect, and your love for the path you chose. Beau's old cutting words no longer carried weight, because my value was never dependent on someone else's approval. I built my skills, my career, my little family, with patience, with passion. And that truth was always there, whether anyone noticed it or not. Now, my mother-in-law doesn't just respect me. She connects with me through the very thing she once doubted. And that change didn't come from winning an argument. It came from a moment when the cake box opened, and from all the days after, when we both chose to understand a little more. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever worked quietly to prove your worth, type 1 below, not to complain, but to remind yourself, when you stay true to your path, recognition may come late, but your worth and your confidence have always been there long before anyone noticed.